Have the LA Kings decided on their next general manager? That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. Also one of the co-hosts of Locked On NHL Game Night, a nightly podcast and YouTube show wrapping up the night in the NHL, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. The LA Kings search for a new GM may be coming to an end soon, as various reports have Ken Holland about to be or likely to be the man to follow Rob Blake as the next general manager of the Kings. For who Ken Holland is and a bit about his background, if you missed it, check out Monday's Locked On LA Kings podcast and YouTube show. As for the reports over the last 24 hours that have varied from his hire being imminent to as soon as today, some of the sources of those reports, frankly, I don't trust. Now, some of them I've never even heard of. However, there is one hockey insider that I do trust. That is Sportsnet's Elliotte Friedman. He's smart, connected, and he doesn't just throw stuff out there for clicks. Here is his latest post on social media regarding the LA Kings GM search. He said, quote, "We'll see where things progress over the next few days, but all indications are that the LA Kings are closing in on Ken Holland as their next general manager." Friedman also said on his latest 32 Thoughts podcast that it now, quote, "appears much less likely that Mark Bergevin will get the Kings GM job." So until I hear something else from Elliotte Friedman or somebody like him, or of course the LA Kings make an announcement, I'm personally going to kind of ignore the other stuff. Now, you're free to listen to whomever you want, but as someone who's worked over 30 years in the business, gathering information, I feel I have a pretty good grasp on who to trust and who to be skeptical about. So I'm not ready to believe that this is completely a done deal yet. That said, there is clearly a lot of smoke around Ken Holland, and it seems like something that could be finalized by the end of the week. I'll quickly repeat what I said about Holland on Monday's show, but again, if you missed it, I would recommend you go back and listen or watch that. But would Ken Holland be my first choice for what that's worth as GM of the Kings? Probably not. I personally would prefer to see somebody younger and hungrier with maybe some fresher ideas. If you want a name, I'll give you one. Matthew Darsh, assistant GM of the Tampa Bay Lightning, whose name constantly comes up as the next hot young guy, so to speak, as far as a general manager. But do I think Ken Holland will be a bad hire? No. His experience being in charge of a team that has won Stanley Cups in Detroit and a team that just made the Stanley Cup final last year in Edmonton shows that he has been and still can be a GM that can get a team to where the LA Kings want to be once again, which is in contention for Stanley Cups. Now, Holland isn't still living off his reputation as a man who built cup winners in the 90s and 2000s. As I said, he was in charge of a team that made the Stanley Cup final last year. And it's also hard not to think it's a good idea to add a Hall of Famer as your general manager. And we talked about the Kings needed to act relatively quickly as far as getting their GM in place. And it certainly seems like that's what they're doing about a week out of deciding to let go of Rob Blake. Kings are in somewhat of a competition with one other NHL team when it comes to hiring a general manager. The only other team right now in the NHL that's looking for a new GM is the New York Islanders. But it is more about getting the new GM in place to decide if they're going to make a coaching change, because there are a lot of coaching vacancies still to be filled, 6 to be exact. Pittsburgh, Vancouver, Seattle all have vacancies, while Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia have interim head coaches that are almost certainly going to be replaced. There are 2 head coaches that have been hired so far this offseason, Joel Quenneville in Anaheim and Mike Sullivan with the New York Rangers. And the one coach that would be at the top of my list to replace Jim Hiller, if a new GM wants to do that, is still available, and that would be Peter Laviolette. He won a Stanley Cup while the head coach of the Carolina Hurricanes. He's taken 2 other teams to the Stanley Cup Finals in the Philadelphia Flyers and the Nashville Predators. And he took a team to the Eastern Conference Finals just last year in the New York Rangers. And oh, by the way, he's the 7th all-time winningest coach in NHL history. Of the teams needing a new head coach that I previously mentioned, if the LA Kings happen to be the 7th team looking for a new head coach, I have to believe that they are the more attractive coaching job over all those other places. The Kings have made the playoffs 4 years in a row. Their roster is pretty much set for next season, so a new coach isn't going to be stepping into a losing situation as opposed to those other jobs. Now, sure, that could also mean there are more expectations to win right away. And of course, a salary, what the coach is going to get paid is always going to be a big part of the conversation as far as where he ultimately wants to go. But I don't think that would be an issue with the Kings. After all, we're talking about an organization that paid Todd McClellan $5 million a season, making him amongst the top paid coaches in the NHL. Plus, let's be honest, LA is a pretty nice place to live, and the pressures of being the head coach here are not the same as they would be in a place like Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Chicago, where there's zero mainstream media pressure. I think it's reasonable to assume that Peter Laviolette or other veteran coaches who might be in consideration for some of those other jobs could very well be waiting to see how things shake out in LA, because it is an attractive job to take over. And once that domino falls, maybe they then look and turn their attention to other opportunities. Of course, this is all assuming that Ken Holland is hired, and it's all assuming that he would want to make a coaching change. But I do think it's more likely an established GM like Ken Holland getting the job would be more likely to come in and make some changes over opposed to a younger, inexperienced GM like a Matthew Darsh, who I recommended or I thought about might be a good candidate. The newer GM probably knows the organization well, has been there and done that, whereas a younger GM comes in, maybe he wants to get a feel for the job, get a feel for what's going on in the organization before deciding to make a big move. But again, that's not an issue for a guy like Ken Holland. If he gets the job, or if a veteran GM gets the job, I think the odds of Jim Hiller being out after one full season go up pretty significantly. Now, for what it's worth, in his 5 years as GM of the Edmonton Oilers, his most recent job, Ken Holland hired 3 different coaches. So again, 3 coaches in 5 years. So he's not a guy who's afraid to pull the trigger if he feels that's a move that needs to be made. When he took over the job, Kent Hitchcock was out and former Kings assistant Dave Tippett was in. Tippett was then fired and replaced by Jay Woodcroft, and then Jay Woodcroft was fired and replaced by current Oilers head coach Ken Knoblauch. Clearly, again, Ken Holland is not opposed to changing a head coach if he feels that is necessary. So again, we are jumping to conclusions a lot here. Holland hasn't been hired yet. And if he's hired, we don't know if he wants to make a coaching change for sure. But like I said, I do think it does increase the chances, if Ken Holland is the guy, that there would be a coaching change. However, it should be pointed out, there is a connection between Ken Holland and Jim Hiller. Of course, like I said, there's a lot of connections when it comes to the NHL with coaches and players and things like that. But Jim Hiller was an assistant coach with Mike Babcock as the head coach in Detroit for one season in Detroit when Ken Holland was the GM there. That was during the 2015-16 season. How much do Ken Holland and Jim Hiller know each other? What kind of a relationship they may or may not have? I'm not sure. I'm guessing it's fair to say they aren't complete strangers, but how that may or may not play into Ken Holland, if he gets the job, deciding to move on from Jim Hiller, I'm not totally sure, but I would say I don't think it would have much of an impact, to be honest. If Ken Holland feels the Kings need a better head coach, I don't think he'd be afraid to make that move. So that's the latest in the LA Kings GM search as it stands right now, 2:30 Pacific time on Tuesday. So we will see how this story progresses. But again, it does appear like the Kings GM search is coming to an end here relatively soon. Up next, we're going to continue our offseason player spotlight with a look at the past season and the future for Drew Doughty. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep filling fuller longer. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether you're snacking at your desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids, whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids. Wonderful Pistachios is a snack that works as hard as you do. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, we're going to put another Kings player in the spotlight from this past season and look ahead to what their status is going forward. We looked at team captain Anze Kopitar on Monday's show. Today, it's another prominent veteran on the team, alternate captain, defenseman Drew Doughty. He just completed his 17th NHL season, all with the Kings. He was a Kings first-round pick, 2nd overall, behind Steven Stamkos back in 2008. He is the franchise leader in games played, points, assists, and game-winning goals by a defenseman. Doughty will be entering next season 2 goals away from passing Rob Blake for the most goals scored by an LA Kings defenseman in franchise history. Overall, he's 3rd in games played, 8th in career points by any skater that has played for the LA Kings. He will go down by most as the best defenseman in franchise history. He and Rob Blake are the only defensemen in Kings history that have won the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman. Doughty did it back in 2015-16. Drew Doughty is a 5-time All-Star, 2-time Stanley Cup winner with the Kings, and when his career is over, his number 8 will be hanging in the rafters at Crypto.com Arena. He'll get a statue outside of the arena if there's still room for any more, and he will be one day in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Now, last season, he only appeared in 30 regular season games. He had 4 goals and 13 points after suffering a fractured ankle in the preseason. This postseason, he had 1 goal and 4 points in 6 games. Is Drew Doughty a top pairing defenseman anymore? I think you could argue that he is not, but like Anze Kopitar, when you argue if he's a top line center anymore, who are the Kings' top defensemen who are also right-handed shots that would be on that top pairing? Now, Kopitar's ice time was reduced as the season went along. In the playoffs, his ice time was behind Quinton Byfield, who looks poised to be the Kings' number 1 center next season. The same can't be said for Drew Doughty. His ice time was not reduced when he came back. A matter of fact, it was just as high as it's ever been, as he led all Kings players in average time on ice during the regular season, 24 minutes and 8 seconds. He led the Kings in average time on ice in the playoffs with 27 minutes and 12 seconds. Now, is Brandt Clarke, like Quinton Byfield, ready to be the Kings' top pairing defenseman on the right side next season? I would say the answer to that is no. Now, Brandt Clarke is hopefully, like Quinton Byfield, the heir apparent to Drew Doughty. That's what I thought has always been the plan for the Kings. But is it next season? Not sure about that. It's only 1 full season in the NHL for Brandt Clarke. However, I do believe the Kings need to start to reduce Drew Doughty's minutes and increase the ice time for Brandt Clarke and Jordan Spence next season. Next season needs to start to be the transition period for those 3 players. Less responsibility for Doughty, more for Clarke and Spence. Now, Doughty won't like it, but too bad. Look, I appreciate Drew Doughty's passion for the game. He clearly still loves to play the game, and it's one of his biggest assets, his passion for the game. And I just think, though, for his sake and the team's sake, it's time that he starts to play less. Now, it doesn't have to happen immediately, but it does need to happen more and more as next season goes along. I would even have a 3-man rotation between Doughty, Clarke, and Spence running the team's power play units. Now, that might not seem ideal or conventional, but again, I just feel like this season needs to be about transitioning more away from Drew Doughty and the minutes he plays, and just as importantly, about getting Clarke and Spence ready to take on bigger roles in the near and distant future, and in particular, hopefully the playoffs next season, which obviously was an issue this postseason. So to be sure, Clark and Spence still need to hold up their end of the bargain. They still need to play well enough to earn their ice time. But again, Drew Doughty's been playing too many minutes for a while now, and that needs to change starting next season. 27 plus minutes in the playoffs is ridiculous. Now, I'm not suggesting Drew can't play anymore, but again, too many minutes for Drew Doughty. His ice time needs to be reduced, especially at this point of his career and with the circumstances surrounding the LA Kings. Now, Drew did get some criticism this past year for his passion to play for Team Canada in the Four Nations Face-Off. Maybe better said, his decision to seemingly push himself and his health for something that doesn't involve the LA Kings. I think that's a fair criticism. And I also understand why Drew Doughty was being a bit selfish with this. His career is winding down. Playing for his country is something that he's very passionate about, and I can appreciate that. And this past year could very well have been his last chance to play for his country in a high-profile event. I don't think he's going to play for Canada in the Olympics next year. The only reason he was on the Canadian Four Nations roster this time around was because of an injury. So I think he looked at this as his last best chance to be able to play for his country and win a gold medal in a big event. That said, I don't know that it was necessarily what was best for him or best for the LA Kings. I mean, look, we're all selfish to a point, and fact is, he can put a gold medal around his neck, and he has some amazing lifetime memories that he got from participating in that event. So in his eyes, maybe it was worth it. I can certainly understand where he's coming from, but also I think criticizing him for that is fair. I do think he probably put his own self-interest ahead of what was the best thing for him as an LA King. So there's that. I certainly think there were times in the playoffs that he wasn't 100%. Certainly there were some times he sat out practices in the postseason as he was still feeling the effects of that ankle injury and maybe how hard he was pushed coming back and playing that extra hockey at a high level in the Four Nations. He even admitted after this season that he still has a lot of work to do to get back where he needs to be as far as continuing to rehab and strengthen that ankle. And probably another reason why they need to start cutting back on his ice time as well. As for Drew Doughty's future, he'll turn 36 years old during next season. He still has 2 more years left on an 8-year contract that is paying him $11 million per season, making him by far the highest paid player on the LA Kings. He's the second highest paid defenseman in the NHL in terms of average annual value, shockingly ahead of players like Zach Werenski and Cale Makar, who are current Norris Trophy finalists. Now, some Kings fans might be upset about that fact. I certainly can't blame Drew Doughty for signing the deal that was offered to him. I mean, we'd all like to make the most possible money we could at our jobs. I certainly can't blame him for that. If you want to be upset about that contract that Drew has right now, you could be upset at the former general manager of the LA Kings that gave him that contract. So I've heard some talk, and there have been some emails on our fan feedback shows about maybe trading Drew Doughty. I think that's extremely unlikely, certainly for next season. He does have a 7-team no-trade list that would factor into that, but look, he's one of the greatest players in Kings history, probably the greatest defenseman in Kings history. You don't just drop guys like that or look to trade him necessarily. Like I said, I don't think it's not that Drew can't play anymore. I just think he needs to have his role reduced. And when his contract is up after the following season, not next season, the season after, I would not be surprised to see the Kings look to either sign him for a short deal at a very reduced rate or look to part ways with Drew Doughty. I don't think this is an Anze Kopitar situation. Like I said, I believe, and I don't know this, I believe that next season would probably be Anze Kopitar's final season in the NHL, and I don't think Kopitar has any desires to play elsewhere. I don't know that that's the case with Drew Doughty. Like I said, he loves playing hockey. He loves being a hockey player, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I think he's one of those guys that, frankly, if there's any other team that would say, yes, we want you, he would play for that team, I think. I don't know that. I feel that just because of the way, he loves the game. So Is the door closed on Drew Doughty after his contract is up? I wouldn't say that necessarily, but I do think that, again, it would be a short-term deal at a very, very reduced rate. And so I could definitely see Drew Doughty finishing his career in a uniform other than the LA Kings. But like I said, I still think he has a role to play with the Kings next season and the season after. But I would definitely like to see the Kings reduce his ice time and start to make the transition into some of the other defensemen on the team, namely Brant Clark, as next season goes along. Up next, we're going to check in on some of the Kings players in the organization that are playing in the World Championship, some other news and notes as well. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and during the action. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players are showing up in the biggest moments, and how could tracking their trends help you build your next big bet? What would it look like to combine live prop bets mid-game based on how the action unfolds? If you've got a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with the same game parlay? How could a $200 bonus in bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and if you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment or more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Check out some news and notes as far as players in the Kings organization or prospects that are still playing hockey. We do have the World Championships going on over in Sweden and Denmark. Philip Deneau, playing for Team Canada, did not have a point in their 4-0 shutout of France earlier today. He does have 1 assist in 3 games so far in the tournament. No games on Tuesday for Kevin Fiala, playing with Team Switzerland, or Martin Kromiak with Slovakia, or Hampton Slukinski with the United States. However, I did miss the fact that Kromiak did have a shootout goal for Slovakia in their 3-2 win over Austria the other day. Some other Kings news and notes. A couple of Kings prospects are still playing hockey. That would include Jared Woolley. He and his London Knights are playing in the OHL Championship Series against the Oshawa Generals. London leading that best-of-7 series 2-1 after dropping the opener. The Knights have won 2 straight as they head into tonight's Game 4. Through 14 playoff games for Kings prospect Jared Woolley, who was a 6th-round pick in 2024. He's got 2 goals, including a game-winning goal, and 6 assists for 8 points. The 6'5", 200-pound defenseman is a plus 15 in the playoffs and has 31 penalty minutes. Also, Kings prospect Kirill Khristanov had an assist in a Game 7 of a playoff series playing in Russia's VHL. That's the KHL version of or I should say it's the Russian version of the AHL, the VHL. The KHL would be their NHL version. Anyway, Khristanov's team has advanced to the VHL championship. He's a defenseman selected by the Kings in the 3rd round back in 2012, and there is also a report this week that Kirill Khristanov will be joining the Ontario Reign next season. And also, I did want to mention something that came out today. If you don't follow the NHL closely, you may not be familiar with offer sheets. It is a rarely used tool by teams to try and sign other teams' restricted free agents. Now, in the last decade, it's only happened 4 times, but it did happen twice last year by the same team against the same team. The St. Louis Blues shocked the hockey world by not only offering 1, but 2 offer sheets to a pair of talented young players on the Edmonton Oilers roster. Now, both of those players, forward Dylan Holloway and defenseman Philip Broberg, signed the St. Louis offer sheets, and because of salary cap issues, which was part of the reason why the Blues made those offer sheets, the Edmonton Oilers could not match the offers and ended up losing 2 23-year-old former first-round draft picks, which may not have hurt the Oilers in the moment as they're looking pretty good in the playoffs, but certainly hurts them down the road. Now, the reason I'm even mentioning it is that there is news today that the NHL has released what the compensation is for teams that they would have to pay to other teams for signing away players with offer sheets. Now, in the history of the LA Kings, they have been involved in 2 offer sheets. One of them landed them Hall of Fame defenseman Larry Robinson back in 1989. The other offer sheet they matched from the St. Louis Blues and kept Marty McSorley until they traded him away. So with the salary cap going up and the precedent being set by the St. Louis Blues last season, there is some added intrigue and drama if we will see some offer sheets made this offseason, which could be some pretty big news. It's kind of like other teams. It's really kind of weird because the offer sheet thing, it's almost something that some general managers see as offensive to try and steal away, if you want to call it that, other teams' players. I've never understood it. It makes no sense to me. You're in competition with these teams. I get that, maybe future deals could be damaged. Maybe you're burning some bridges by stealing other players away. I'm guessing that the Edmonton Oilers aren't in a big rush to get into business with the St. Louis Blues, but hey, it's a competition. This is, a cutthroat business. You're doing whatever you can to help your team, and the St. Louis Blues definitely did that. So could the LA Kings use this kind of a tool to help improve their roster for next season? It's possible. As for any players on the Kings' current roster that could be looked at as other teams to target as restricted free agents, the only player that the Kings have that's going to be an RFA this offseason is forward Alex Laferriere. Is he that type of a player? Could be coveted by some other teams. I wouldn't be shocked if another team made him an offer sheet. However, the Kings, I think, it depends on what happens. And obviously this is all affected by who the next general manager is going to be to decide, what unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents the Kings might go after in the offseason. But as it stands right now, the Kings are not in the same situation that the Oilers were, where if somebody made an offer sheet to Alex Laferriere, they would be in a position where they couldn't match it. So just an interesting little note and something to keep in mind this offseason that we may see around the NHL. All right, for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On Kings every day, obviously coming up on our next show, the latest in what's going on with the Kings GM search. Will the deal to finalize Ken Holland as the Kings' next general manager be announced by this time tomorrow? Obviously, if it is, we will certainly be talking all about it. If it isn't, we'll certainly be talking about it as well. We'll also put another Kings player in the offseason spotlight and, of course, pass along any other Kings-related news that we bump into. If you want to send an email for this week's Friday Fan Feedback Show, or for any other reason, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com. You're always welcome to post your thoughts every show. If you're watching on YouTube in the comment section, we'd love you to stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.